Hello and welcome to the Headlamp Report. I'm your host, Mark Singer. Before we dive into the report proper, there are three recent items of news that I want to bring to your attention because they relate directly to the plan that I've developed for monitoring SpaceX's Starship program. Today is Tuesday, March 16th, 2021. The first piece of news, it was reported this morning by Michael Sheetz of CNBC that the Federal Aviation Administration had approved the launch of Starship serial number 11, SN11, and that's a significant piece of news because, as it's reported, the investigation into SN10's mishap has not yet concluded. Now, this is really great news because it shows that the FAA have confidence in the way SpaceX are handling these mishaps from a safety perspective. On the other hand, it means that my rule of thumb about 5 weeks between mishaps and new licensed launches is overly conservative. That was based on the presumption that investigations would proceed in a serial manner, and that importantly the FAA wouldn't give a go-ahead for another launch while an investigation was pending. So it appears that that no longer applies. Later in this video you'll hear that I predict a launch for SN11 no earlier than week commencing 5th of April. But I now feel confident enough to revise that, and I now think that the SN11 launch will occur no later than 31st of March. Secondly, Chris Bergin of NASA Spaceflight reported yesterday that SpaceX have internally a target to go for an orbital launch with serial number 20 and Super Heavy booster number 3 by July 2021. Even considering the natural optimism of folk in the rocket business, this target seems astoundingly bullish and also incredibly unrealistic. My own plan puts the timeline for orbital testing between July and December 2022, and although I naturally applaud SpaceX's ambition, I won't be changing my timelines anytime soon. The third piece of news, announced a little earlier this month on the 2nd of March, was about the Dear Moon project. Now, Dear Moon is an initiative funded by a Japanese billionaire. It's a lunar tourism mission that essentially takes a SpaceX Starship with a crew of 8 on a single circumlunar trajectory, and this has now been announced for 2023. Now again, my own timeline is aligned for a cargo mission in 2024, so it doesn't envisage a human rated Starship until after this, and certainly not by 2023. Now, in a future video I will look at Dear Moon and orbital readiness in greater detail. So without further ado, let's dive into Headlamp Report number 2. Hello and welcome to the Headlamp Report. I'm your host, Mark Singer. If you're new to my channel, I've created a project plan for SpaceX's Starship project with milestones and timelines that meet the aspirational goals of sending a cargo mission to Mars in 2024 and a manned mission in 2026. I've done this because although I follow SpaceX's progress very closely, I really want to know what the likelihood is of these goals being achieved. Since we don't have visibility of SpaceX's own project plan, and in the end because nobody else is doing it. If you're not here by mistake, I'll assume that you do have some familiarity with the Starship program. In the first of these Headlamp reports, I shared my approach and the thinking behind my initial plan in some detail, and I'll refer to some of that content here. Having a plan allows me to make predictions that are based on my milestones and timelines, and in this and future videos I'll update that plan based on real world events. This particular update follows the flight of the Starship prototype vehicle serial number 10 on the 3rd of March 2021. There are many videos of SN10's test flight out there already, but since I'm trying to improve my video editing, and because I suspect that a good proportion of my audience probably isn't massively into the Starship project yet, I'm going to recap that test flight here and now. All you really need to know at this point is that these rockets are prototypes, proof of concept vehicles, and not the finished articles at all. And also that SpaceX are 0 for 2 in landing them. SN8 and SN9 both crashed on landing. So how does SN10 fare? Let's find out.
First we have the launch, where 3 Raptor engines lift the Starship off the launch pad and on up to an apogee of 10 kilometres. I love watching the slow, graceful climb. At this stage of testing, SpaceX is avoiding stressing the vehicle too much on ascent, so it's deliberately keeping the engines at a low throttle. Here you see one of the 3 engines has been turned off in order to precisely control speed and altitude. This is a view looking back at the ground. Now the second Raptor shuts down. These are pre-planned. Note the movements of the engine nozzles used to keep the vehicle on its correct flight trajectory. Starship then prepares for a transition to what's called the belly flop. This is so cool. All engines are now shut down and Starship is in free fall. At little more than 1 kilometre above the landing site, Starship reignites all 3 of its engines and performs a flip to vertical. It only needs 1 engine to land, so the other 2 are quickly shut down once more. As you watch Starship land, if you keep your eyes on the tip of the nose cone, you can definitely see a bit of a bounce. It's not supposed to do that, indicating that it still came in a bit hot. Nevertheless, it stood upright on the landing area for several minutes until this happened.
If you spotted the transition to the belly flop position was actually SN9, not SN10, then well spotted. You should be making your own channel content. So how does the test flight that we've just witnessed impact the project plan? No pun intended. Let's find out. Mars cargo mission readiness depends on achieving 3 critical capability milestones: low Earth orbit, refilling of Starship with liquid oxygen and liquid methane, and developing a cargo mission capability. Achieving low Earth orbit, which in my opinion is the hardest of the 3, I've divided into 4 sub-milestones, 1.1 to 1.4, that you can see here. SN10's test flight relates to sub-milestone 1.2, Starship performance. Note that I previously attributed a 50-50 or 50% likelihood that critical capability milestone number 1 would be achieved by 31st of December 2022. In that assessment, I didn't reference these further sub-milestones. I've now attributed likelihoods to each of these four, which has moved the overall likelihood of achieving low Earth orbit by 31st December 2022 to 41%. This video is going to focus on the sub-milestones for 1.2. Please refer to the slide pack that goes with this video if you want to look at how I've got to the other milestone likelihoods for 1.1, 1.3 and 1.4. Starship performance capability milestone I've divided into two further sub-milestones, 1.2.1 capability and 1.2.2 reliability. Following SN10's test, I'm prepared to mark 1.2.1 capability as complete. But since the test flight was not totally successful, it doesn't move the sub-milestone for reliability any closer to being achieved. I've assessed this as having a 90% likelihood of being achieved by 30th of June 2022. I've defined a totally successful test flight as one in which the Starship can be placed back on the launch pad after landing with minimal or no rework. Reliability is an order of magnitude more difficult than capability, but it is central to the ultimate success of the Mars project. So much so that I'm going to do a separate video dedicated to how this might play out over the next 2 or 3 years. I've previously noted two principal challenges to SpaceX meeting the timelines for a 2024 cargo mission. The first is SpaceX's inherent ability to meet all the technical required milestones at a sufficiently rapid pace, and the second is SpaceX's compliance with all applicable regulations around launch and re-entry. I've had a concern about how the relationship between SpaceX and the Federal Aviation Administration might be developing into an adversarial one, as this could significantly delay the pace of testing. I've offered a rule of thumb of 5 weeks between Starship test flights when an adverse flight event occurs, to allow for the investigation process to take place and a new launch licence to be approved. Since SN10 met its end in a rapid unscheduled disassembly, or RUD, SpaceX and FAA investigations have begun and my 5-week countdown clock has started. Now, SN10 launched 4 weeks and 1 day after SN9's RUD. Hopefully that means I've been a bit too conservative, but still for now I predict SN11 will launch no earlier than week commencing 5th of April. If it launches sooner, I'll revise my rule of thumb accordingly. So where does that leave the likelihood of a cargo mission launching in 2024? The updated likelihood is 41%. That's for achieving low Earth orbit, which is obtained by multiplying these sub-milestones together. This means the updated percentage for the Mars cargo mission readiness based on the 3 critical capability milestones is now 10.25% as shown here, or a 1 in 10. A 1 in 10 chance is a downgrading from my initial 1 in 8. But I think this is justified based on SN10 not being totally successful. This new chart shows the timelines for the 4 sub-milestones for low Earth orbit capability. You can see how much longer I have allocated to reaching reliability for Starship compared with the other sub-milestones. My analysis also predicts that Starship testing and Super Heavy booster testing will proceed in parallel until SpaceX are ready to commence with stacked testing. My plan has this phase starting no earlier than July 2022. Remember, if they don't make the 2024 launch window for cargo, the next available launch window is November 2026. In the next Headlamp report, which I'm really excited about, I'll consider when SpaceX might need to make a go, no-go decision for a Mars cargo launch, what implication this date or dates might have for the rest of the project, and the one thing on which everything else depends for success of the Mars project. But that's all for now. See you on Mars. There are many videos out there competing for your attention, with the SpaceX space being particularly crowded. If you like this one, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to watch more content like this, do hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost anything, and it really does help get my videos promoted on YouTube. Thanks very much. See you soon.